Joaquin Phoenix stars in the 2017 movie You Were Never Really Here. Here's why I think this movie is vastly underrated. It's getting hammered on Amazon. Just look at some of these terrible reviews. I think this movie is really good and really rich. Coming up next. So this You Were Never Really Here was written and directed by Lynn Ramsay, Scottish-born, and it's pretty sophisticated. The movie does expect you to work pretty hard as a viewer to figure out what's going on. That may be why it's getting a lot of hate on the internet. It's only 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb, which does like revenge-type movies like this, bloody and violent, and on Amazon, which Amazon Studios released this. Movie really has pretty terrible ratings. Actually, I was shocked at how low they were. I think part of the reason for that is the film straddles two worlds, the art house cinema that I think it celebrates through its shot making, certainly its sound design. On the other hand, the popular revenge-like flicks from Taken, Taxi Driver's in here, a little bit of Hitchcock, and even John Wick, which, this movie is sort of echoing in a lot of ways because its main character, its hero, is a hitman taking revenge on people. Actually, he's a rescuer, rescuing kidnapped girls, but he's also taking out bad dudes, or we presume them to be bad dudes, a lot like the movie and the Taken franchise. If someone expects an easy popcorn flick from this, they're not going to get it. That's maybe why this is so disappointing. But I find that this movie has a vast world, and it opens up. It starts out as sort of a 70s art house flick where you think it's going to be character-centered and on little moments. I felt like it was going to be slow cinema at first because the main character, while at the beginning of the movie he does a job, and you briefly see the after moments of that. He goes to his mom's house, he does sing songs with her, and nothing really happens in the movie of plot significance till about the 20-minute mark. And the movie never really reveals much in its flashbacks or dream shots. Now, in the second shot of the movie, we see a little boy, and I think we can infer that that's the main character of the movie, or that's somebody related to him. And the movie will do this throughout, just pepper very lightly flashback scenes, shots, or dream shots. The character is dreaming things up. We see his perspective. But you really have to piece things together and be an active viewer during this movie. Anybody wanting to be led along, as in a lot of popular revenge flicks, will not like this movie because they will have to be active and they may resist trying to put different pieces of this movie together. In fact, pieces are exactly what this movie is dealing with. Notice the opening shot, little dust fragments floating around, ends up being a lot of shots in this movie are very particular, honing in on one particular thing in the scene, and we don't get wide shots, we don't see whole scenes. Sometimes we do, but a lot of times things are left to our imaginations as viewers, as in a sequence in the middle of the movie when the main character, played by Joaquin Phoenix, goes and takes out a bunch of bad dudes and rescues a girl because she's been kidnapped, is basically a sex slave. That sequence takes place in security cameras. We don't see that much of what happens as you might in a John Wick movie, for example. Now, I really love Joaquin Phoenix in just about everything. This movie in particular is great in, and it precedes the Joker movie, which is kind of sort of the same but opposite. This movie does echo Taxi Driver. There are scenes where, as we know, the main character, as we figure out, he is doing jobs, illegal, extra legal. He's sort of a vigilante figure, but he's being paid in sort of a small business that's doing this, going to rescue girls who have been taken and are, I think, sex slaves or at least kidnapped. So the first shots of him we see, he's monk-like, he's a samurai-like. Sometimes I get the feeling this is a bit of a samurai movie, and then hints of the Jedi, that hooded figure. Who could not think of, or at least I couldn't, of Star Wars here, and the Jedi doing good behind the scenes. You get lots of quirks with him. He enjoys singing pop songs. He seems to love his mother, takes care of her as an older lady, likes green jelly beans in particular, as a cat lover. A number of quirky things like that. And this movie will try to, like a 70s movie, open up the main character as a rich human being. However, a lot of that's done through those flashback or dream sequences, and I think we can infer from those, one, he was abused or even tortured as a young kid Probably by his father. That's my wild guess, at least. Then we have to ask, okay, where was his mother in this? I think his mother was also abused. At least that's how I interpret some of these scenes. Second, that he was in a war of some sort and a former soldier. We see his body is scarred. A few flashbacks to what I think is Iraq. And some things happen there that are pretty devastating. So this character is dealing with serious trauma. And one way he does that, maybe the main way, is to act like a vigilante. Disturbingly, though, we see him try to commit suicide several times, or maybe that's just part of his routine, is to feign suicide. I'm not really sure, but I think he might be committing suicide, as with the opening shot. He wants to kill himself, and he ends up killing bad guys to help children. We'll see him, and this suicide stuff is really well opened up by the middle to the end of the movie, when a variety of things happen, which I'm not going to spoil. Obviously, this movie is a vigilante movie, but it's harkening back to Taxi Driver, so it's an existential crisis movie of a good man who wants to do good things or is morally proper, but doing them beyond the law. And what's really interesting to me about this movie is it's coming out at a time when, one, concerns about Me Too, this is 2017, and sex slavery, sex trafficking, at least in the United States, maybe in other places in the world. A lot of my, let's say, liberal friends were really invested in that. We're doing stuff like wearing pink shirts and having fundraising drives. I haven't heard about that for a little while. This is 2022, but what it morphed into, weirdly, or maybe this just came up somewhere else, pedophilia in high places amongst officials, executives, elites. The Jeffrey Epstein case came out a few years ago. This movie seems to believe that in high places somewhere in the world, here it's the United States, that officials are abusing children some way, somehow. And now I know a number of people on the right wing who believe that there are a lot of pedophiles, and it's really sick in politics. And so you've had concerns all over the place about what's happening to children, sex slavery, trafficking of children, stealing, kidnapping of them. This movie seems to be about all those concerns. It is in its own world from a book. But I think it's really hitting on real-world issues of serious importance, and I think any political group could probably read into it what they want. But this main character, living on the edge of death, maybe needing death, maybe needing to kill in order to satisfy his trauma. The soundscape develops his trauma quite a bit. In fact, the opening of this movie, before we see the fragments of dust in the air, we hear things, and he is counting down and talking to himself. He seems to be, I think, this is my interpretation, talking in his father's voice. I think his father or his stepfather, some male figure, abused him really terribly. So thus he, as an empathetic sort of person, knows what it's like to be a child abused, and thus maybe that's part of the reason why he's going to rescue girls. His trauma, though, is foregrounded in this movie, and then his motivations perhaps to act on these children's behalf. But what this movie does with his relationship with the girl he rescued in the middle is really touching and really interesting to me by the end of the movie, which, again, I'm not going to spoil, you just have to watch it. Now, I love the acting in this, Joaquin Phoenix, but the direction is absolutely outstanding. Lynn Ramsey, every shot seems to matter, and they're all rich and evocative, and she'll show you a meaningful shot, but just one time, and expect you to get a lot out of that on your viewing. She's not going to repeat too much as a popular Hollywood movie would. And the music here is Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead, and I really like his scores a lot. Usually they're odd, they're quirky. There's a variety of musical choices, and I think they're supposed to correspond with certain scene sequences, feelings, emotions. Soundscape design in here is fantastic and is super important to the movie. And for all those reasons, that makes this a complex movie worth watching once to be surprised by it, to rewatch, to analyze and pick it apart and think about all the decisions they made and how you get from the beginning to the end story-wise. I just love the blend of story and the art of cinema here. And so I just think this movie is way better than people are rating it. That's why it's an underrated movie to me. Now, what do you think of You Were Never Really Here? Hopefully this video helps you out, either if you tried to watch it but didn't understand it, or if you've never seen it before. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thanks and have a great day.